Okay, we'll try to make this quick, given that we're pretty behind. As we all know, investment in African tech startups have reduced over the past 1 year. So if you look at between January to March last year, African tech startups attracted about $1.5 billion. And between January to March this year was $649 million. So that's a drastic decline. What we're going to delve into today is the reasons behind the decline, what we need to do to boost investor confidence, and finally, what are the solutions for us. I'm going to ask a question, and when I do, please also use it as an opportunity to introduce yourself, and the question will go around to everybody. First question is really understanding the impact of the decline on African tech startups, and also what are the distinct challenges that African tech startups face.
Hi. Should we introduce ourselves first?
Yes, really quickly.
Hi, I'm Lexi Novitsky, General Partner at Norskin 22. I live here in Lagos, and we invest in Series A through C stage companies with our 200 million Africa Tech Growth Fund. But based all across the continent and investing in category leaders across fintech and market enablement primarily. Do you want me to answer the question? Okay, so I mean, the number one driver is, of course, what's happening in the global landscape. I think it's important to point out that relative to those stats, which make Africa in a silo look pretty depressing, this is actually one of the first periods that we've outperformed the growth in other regions across the world. So if you've seen Latin America, their funding has dropped even much more rapidly than in Africa. That said, I think there might be a bit of a lag, as has been the case with a lot of the growth we saw in Africa. And I think with the drop, we'll see that also. I think there's a lot more pain yet to come as it kind of filters through the ecosystem. But primarily, we're seeing the effects, I think, from a global tech ecosystem perspective.
All right, Olaido Lusojoke, partner Due Diligence Africa. What we actually do is we carry out due diligence for investors and also for founders to make the founders investment ready so that the investors can go in and invest. One of the things we look at again in terms of the decline is really more about the accountability. We've noted that accountability, ethics, and governance has also made it, is also another issue where most investors don't want to invest in founders in Africa. And it's one of the things that we are there to actually look out for.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ola Brown. I run HealthCap. We're a pre-Series A fund that invests in health tech and fintech. And we invest in the 4 big African markets of Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Egypt. So in terms of the, I guess, what is a market downturn, I think that there's a lot of anxiety over this period because it's new to a lot of people. And I guess a lot of founders and maybe some investors haven't experienced a market downturn before. But when people ask me about this, I always talk about an Old Testament story where Joseph was put in charge of the economy over 4,000 years ago in the Bible in Egypt. And there was a massive boom where he was prime minister, and then he had to manage Egypt through a downturn. So market up cycles and down cycles have been happening for thousands of years. This isn't the first, and this won't be the last. And what founders and investors need to concentrate on, because we all run investment businesses, is building really strong businesses that have fundamental value regardless of the stage of the cycle. Revenue and profit never go out of fashion. They're fashionable in the boom cycles, and they're fashionable in the down cycles as well. So my advice for myself as an investor and running an investment business, and also for founders, is to just keep focused on building really, really great businesses.
Hi, good evening. Nick, I'm a managing partner at Vested World. We invest in early stage companies in East and West Africa. I'm based in Lagos and have spent pretty much all of my career in Africa. And I think because of that, similar to the earlier comments, we've seen so many different cycles, ups and downs, and many, many downs actually compared to other markets. So this isn't a shocking time. I think African businesses have had to be resilient for a range of reasons, including the fact that Africa does not receive as much venture capital as it should receive from a global perspective. So I think that's the situation. Unfortunately, a lot of the capital is coming from outside, and so we are subject to some of the global dynamics, including the fact, if you look at Kenya last year, around the election, significant decline year on year in funding. The same thing for Nigeria. The Q on Q difference was like 92% for Nigeria reduction for Q1. Q2 and Q1 combined, 77% reduction. What that means is that people are scared about elections in Africa. Hopefully we're not scared as Africans about elections in Africa, but if most of your funding is coming from outside, there are gonna be these kind of shocks. So I think there are still some highlights, as Lexi has said, but yes, there's been a decline. We're still investing. Many others are still investing. I don't think in the grand scheme of things there's going to be a long-term decline, but when you're less than 1% of global VC, you're going to have that happen. We invest not just in tech, but also in consumer and agribusiness, which hopefully are slightly more stable because people have to eat, people have to consume products, but you still see challenges, especially around some of the other macro issues.
It's a tough act to follow after you've had 4 experts, ladies, laid down the way they have. My name is Kola Aino, General Partner of Ventures Platform. I totally agree with everything that's been said. I think if I would add anything, it's really the fact that, 2020 saw, we saw the Paystack exit, we saw valuations bubble up, and one of the most sort of things that gladdened my heart was really that attracted a new wave of local angel investors, corporate investors, and institutional investors. And what we're seeing is that enthusiasm has waned locally, which I think is probably the most disturbing thing for me, because I strongly believe in the value of local capital that has context. But if there are any local investors in the room, market cycles happen, has been said already, and these times are actually an opportunity to build resilient companies that are not full of fluff. And so we're actively investing at Ventures Platform, pre-seed all the way to Series A. And look, we think this too will pass, as they say. Yeah.
Given the waning interest that you described for both local and foreign investors, what would you say are their main concerns right now for investments into African startups?
Valuation, number one. I think probably fueled not by the investors on the stage here, but there was a massive increase in valuation, driven a lot of times by either not smart investors or investors that were coming from Silicon Valley that were just testing out, the Africa ecosystems. And for them, it wasn't their bread and butter like it is ours. And valuations increased far too rapidly for the metrics that these companies were actually achieving.
I think for me, I would say it's more about trust. We see founders falsifying some of their numbers. We've seen people not presenting the accurate numbers to the founders. She's talked about valuation. But we've seen in terms of some companies without structures, without processes, doing our work, and then you see not just the founder bringing in fraud, you've also seen members of the team. Also, I've seen a particular company that the whole team in the finance team were actually the one that were perpetrating fraud within that organization. And then we had to go in, they started fraud as far back as maybe 6 months, even before the CEO actually got to know that this was actually going on. So that also is one of the things why investors are also worried about investing in Africa. It's not just about Africa, I think it's also global.
I think there's two different conversations going on, so I'll pick up on both of them. So there's two types of investors, and I think we've both been referring to different types of investors. There's investors that invest directly in companies, and I think I'll pick up on that point that investors that are directly investing in companies do have some trust issues around the companies that they're investing in. But then there's investors that invest in investors like us. And their major challenge is, at this stage in the market cycle, venture is just not attractive. Last week, I got an offer for risk-free US Treasury bills at like 5-point-something%. Berkshire Hathaway and Microsoft are almost at 6% risk-free. So at this stage in the market cycle, it's just not attractive to invest in risky startups. And I think there's also the trust conversation around foreign investors investing in Africa. Most American investors actually invest within the Silicon Valley area. I was at a conference in San Francisco, a VC conference, and there was a lady there from Oklahoma. And she got out a map of America and said, how many Americans can point out where I'm from on the map? And hardly anybody could, because their universe is really around California. And they don't invest in Kentucky, they don't invest in Mississippi, they don't invest in, because they don't know those places. So now you're telling them Enugu. It's just a different conversation.
All right, thank you. I think you're definitely onto something about whether Africa is on the radar. I would say this question about how much VC capital is being allocated to Africa does have to do with broader biases in how capital is being allocated globally. It's very clear, less than 1% doesn't make sense for our share of GDP, but there's still work we have to do in terms of exits. There's work we have to do to some extent in terms of governance, but I think it's less about the founders and more about our context. We don't have very strong regulatory, legal justice systems that could potentially inspire investor confidence if you're not here and you don't know what to look for. But I think it is potentially an issue that, investors aren't coming to Africa because of fraud. There is fraud in every market. There's fraud definitely in US at much larger levels than we've ever seen before over the last 2 years. And so yes, it exists. There are definitely ways that we as investors are and can work on to go around it, but I don't think that's the narrative. If the narrative is African businesses are more fraudulent than US businesses, I will say that's racism and that's bias. So let's leave it there. But yes, we have to work on it, but let's not say that's why. It could be an excuse, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to underline that point. I definitely do not think that startups in Africa or in Nigeria by any chance more fraudulent or more risky than global startups. I think what's happened really is, as the market slowed, everyone started paying a lot more attention, right? It was no longer strange to ask for a data room. I mean, we used to get, funny replies to emails asking for access to data rooms in 2021 because no one was asking for them, right? People were wiring checks in 3 days over WhatsApp and whatnot. And so everyone has definitely slowed down and everyone's taking their time. And that definitely does raise a certain level of awareness and tension in the ecosystem. I do think, however, that there is need for founders to shore up governance and boards. I mean, people used to say boards, you only need a board when you get to Series A. I frankly think once you've raised above a certain amount of money, you need a board. And I think the issue here is people often think boards are about just governance and rules and limitations, but boards can truly be catalytic in different strategic ways. And so when you flip how you think about boards from being a governance only tool to being a catalytic sort of a strategic tool, then it begins to sort of align with what can help your business grow. There's a company in our portfolio that's had a board from their seed stage, and we've seen how that board actually accelerated the growth of the company. And I just think it's a great case study.
There has been a recurring theme on governance and compliance. Based off that, what are the main governance and compliance barriers that you see for African startups to attract investments? And how do you think this can be addressed in order to instill confidence in the investors, both local and foreign?
Okay, all right. If I follow what Collard said, we had a session with microtraction founders just about last week. And one of the questions that was asked is that, can you just raise up your hand if you actually have a board? But just few of them. And when you have those things in place, the board, the advisory committee, it also makes it easier for you in terms of the governance, having the right structures in place, the right processes in place. Don't just look at yourself and think, I'm very small. I'm just a startup. I'm just pre-seed. Start putting in the processes from inception. It then makes it easier for you on the long run. Those are the things that we also talk about. Look at it, be investment ready. Even when you are pre-seed, think about the long run. Just don't think about the short run. It's something that all founders and all companies, all startups should also look out for.
When you're asking about barriers, I think the number one barrier is a startup doesn't know, right? Like a lot of these founders maybe they've worked as an engineer at one of the other tech companies, but they haven't been involved in the building blocks to put together these companies that have scaled. So I think that's when investors come in and really can be kind of the friendly hand to bring them along on the journey with that governance, even if it's, how do you get your ESOP right, which is a big, important part of the puzzle.
Every company actually has a board, by default. I think the issue here is the independence of the board and really having boards that are functional, that meets, where you have reserved matters and whatnot. And so I think investors can play a role here in helping companies get their boards to a level that is commensurate to the stage of growth of the business. Right? If you're a pre-Series A company, I think if you have a 3-person board, maybe 2 founders and 1 investor or 1 external, I think that suffices. What we see that can be problematic ranges from in some cases, rare cases, commingling of funds. You're a fintech company and you don't have an annual audit. That can create problems, right? And I think the topic of accountability is actually something that everyone that raises money should really consider, because if you don't have an accountability system, the tendency is that the lines can get blurred very easily, and that creates challenges. There are a few cases that we all know about, but this is not to say there's a higher concentration of bad actors in Lagos or in Africa than there is in India or in the US. Yeah.
This is such an interesting question because I've just published a book on this. And it's called Journey to Series A. And Lexi's partner, Natalie, kindly gave a book review at the book launch a few weeks ago. And one of the sort of guiding principles for writing the book was this idea that the journey to Series A starts when you raise your seed. And as a former founder who started a company thinking, when you're a doctor, they tell you that every point in your life when you're trying to become a doctor, they tell you that you're very smart. Oh, you're very smart, you should go to medical school. You're very smart, so you should do this. Oh, you're very smart, so you should. And then I sort of graduated and started a company, and I realized I was very foolish. I think that the idea of being technically very good at something, and this goes to your point about just not knowing, is you can be very good at delivering babies or, taking out an appendix, but that doesn't mean that you know anything about running a business, and that's the position where I found myself in. And sort of 5 years into the business, I had to start rebuilding my accounts and start, getting people to review all, and that process of review actually can take 2 years. And you can't raise your Series A until you get all of those things clean. So I think once you've raised your seed rounds, one thing about Nigeria has a lot of things that are not going for it, but one thing that we do have is a lot of old men that are unemployed, that are retired, that know people, and just know the way things work. These are people that are great resources for your board. They know LRS, they know FRS, they know ITF, they know the police, they know everybody. And these are people that are not just there to control you, but they're there to help you put things in place, and they're there to guide you through that compliance process. So that your daddy's friend, that's a lawyer, that used to lecture in Unilag or whatever, this is the kind of person that you can put on your board and will be very, very helpful because they've just been around a long time and they know a lot of people.
Final question. What would be your advice to African startups in order for them to attract investments in the current funding landscape?
I think, look, there's a lot of different points of advice. I'm sure other people will dive in. But I think we're in a market now where a path to profitability and gross margin expansion matter, if not as much, maybe even more than your growth. So number one point is make sure you're building something that is a sustainable company where you can show initially attractive unit economics and really show over the long term how you're going to build a profitable business.
I'll say be investment ready for the investors. And then being investment ready is you have your numbers in place, your processes in place, your ethics in place, your governance in place, your accountability in place, and be investment ready for the investors.
I would echo what Lexi said. This focus on fundamentals and what I said earlier, margin, revenue, profit never go out of fashion. If you are profitable or near profitable, you have high gross margins, and you're growing fast, you will raise money in any market. I can guarantee you that everybody here will write you a check if you have those three things. If you are not, that's when you struggle. So in any market, whether it's a good market or a bad market, if you're profitable, near profitable, you're growing really fast, and you have good margins, tech margins, and a tech margin, okay, I won't give you an exact margin, but a tech margin is a higher margin than you would see in a traditional business, especially if you're a software business, then you will raise money in any phase of the market cycle.
Yeah, I would say the growth at all costs that was happening is very challenging now. So if you're still trying to do growth at all costs and your burn is out of control and you're not even engaging with your current investors, let alone future, come to a different path, which I would say is you still need to grow, but look at that burn, look at your margins. And the growth part of it is we just had this Naira thing. We have over 20% inflation. There is a situation in which you end up just having years and years of flat growth, and then can we invest in you? So I think there has to be some consideration of the emerging market dynamic, but also of the market dynamic, which is that there's perhaps less funding available to raise. So be careful about that. I think the other piece is get to know the right investors for the path of your company and stay in touch with them. When we ask for investor check-in points, even if we're not on your cap table yet, we actually mean it. So we want to hear from you about that journey. If you come to us and you're like, we're closing in 2 weeks in this market dynamic, that one, that doesn't work.
Well, in addition to everything that's been said, I would say particularly within the context of Nigeria, if you're earning Naira revenues, you've got inflation at what, 26, whatever, pick your number. You've got Naira devaluation. Your chances of being successful at fundraising are higher if your growth rate is higher than the blend of those two variables, right? So at Ventures Platform, we're looking to invest in companies that year on year can either grow at a rate that's higher than the blend of the impact of inflation and currency devaluation. And that's an easy number to calculate. Thanks.
Profitability margins, profitability margins. Thank you so much for spending your Friday evening with us. Have a good evening.